All right. Hello and welcome to the Middle East Forum Speaker Webinar Series and Podcast. I'm Stacey Roman and I will be moderating this discussion today. We're pleased to have Mr. Sirwan Kajjo, a journalist, researcher, and author who has worked as a broadcaster at the Kurdish Service of the Americas, join us to discuss U.S. forces in Syria. What role do they play? Mr. Kajjo will speak for 15 minutes and open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn our discussion over to Mr. Sirwan Kajjo.
Thank you, Stacey, and I'd like to also thank the Middle East Forum for this opportunity. The focus of this talk today is specifically on the northern part of Syria, where there are multiple local groups on the ground that are supporting either regional or foreign powers. And just to help viewers conceptualize what I'll be talking about, I would like to share this map so you all know what region of Syria I'm referring to. So this map basically shows the zones of control or zones of influence in throughout Syria, but like I said, my focus is on the northern part, where you see the yellow part is essentially under the control of US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. These are a Kurdish-led group that has been a major US partner in the fight against ISIS terrorists. The gray area in between is occupied by Turkish-backed Syrian militias, where the green regions in the northwest are also controlled by either Turkish-backed groups or Al-Qaeda affiliated Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or formerly known as Al-Nusra Front. So as you can imagine, and also before I forget, the little red dots near the Hasaka region, to the border with Turkey, Syrian region, Iranian allies. The region is, like I said, primarily under the control of US-backed forces, but since 2019, certain dynamics have changed in the region. The partial US withdrawal in October 2019 caused a new Turkish invasion into the gray area that I referred to earlier here between Ras Al Ain and Tel Abyad, resulting in new dynamics where Turkey is Turkey and its backed forces, Syrian groups, are also an important actor in this very complicated security equation in northern Syria. So right now you have the United States with its 900 troops on the ground that are part of the US-led coalition against remnants of ISIS. And you see ISIS and the regime-held areas. See the black dots here and there. These are pockets of where ISIS does continue to carry out attacks against regime forces, but also against Kurdish forces in the yellow zone. You have that. You also have the Russians and the Iranians supporting the Syrian government troops. And you also have Turkey and its allies, its Syrian allies, as well as Al-Qaeda elements in the northwest, which is this has caused a very chaotic situation where a lot of locals don't understand the dynamics, even as they go through towns and cities in that part of Syria, where checkpoints could be, running into your life, essentially. The United States has been there, as you all know, since the beginning of the war in ISIS in 2014. The U.S. military presence has fluctuated over the years, but currently American officials say 900 troops remain there to advise local forces, being the SDF, the Kurdish forces, counter-terrorism operations, and which has increased in recent weeks as ISIS continue to carry out attacks against civilians as well as SDF fighters that are stationed particularly along the areas between along the Euphrates rivers, which essentially divides the Deir ez-Zor province in eastern Syria into two zones of control, one that is under the regime and Iranian and Russian control, and the northeastern side that is under the US and Kurdish control. That is part of the yellow zone, as you can see on this map. How much? Because that's the question that myself and many people who watch Syria often get asked is how we get from keeping troops there in Syria, and how strategic it is for the United States to keep that contingent, whether it's for its Middle East strategic interests or for the sole purpose of combating ISIS, which a lot of people tend to forget that it's still there, it's still powerful, and it can still harm the interests of the United States and its allies in the region and abroad. So keeping a small number of troops that can keep the peace, not only in the fight against ISIS, but also in keeping stability in this part of Syria that has been essentially semi-autonomous for the past 9 years, also thanks to American presence, partially. And so, like I said, not only because the fight against ISIS continues in parts of the region, but also because Turkey continues to target these same American allies that have been working with the United States and its allies for the past 9 years. As you know, the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and its main elements, that's the YPG, the Kurdish People's Protection Units, are considered as a terrorist organization by the Turkish government. Turkey views or doesn't make any distinction between the SDF, that is the counter-terrorism unit or force, from the Turkey-based Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, which is listed by the United States, the European Union, and Turkey as a terrorist organization, as a foreign terrorist organization. But Turkey doesn't see that distinction, which is why it has carried out 3 major offensives inside Syrian territory since the beginning of the conflict, but really since 2016. 3 major offensives, as well as almost daily attacks, mostly by using drone strikes against personnel and leaders of the SDF, because Turkey believes these are the same individuals that have worked or continue to work with the PKK. Now, unfortunately, a large number of casualties as a result of these Turkish attacks throughout the region, and we're talking about a vast region that is under Kurdish control in north and northeastern Syria, are civilian. I have personally covered stories from their families of those victims who have proof that these individuals had nothing to do. They don't even belong to any defense forces in the region, let alone being affiliated with the PKK. This has caused a lot of problem. This has also raised questions about what does the U.S. think about these Turkish attacks and continued threats against American only allies in Syria, which in my opinion, the United States, Washington still needs a stable partner in Syria, not only to continue the fight against ISIS, but also to have someone whom the United States can rely on when it comes to the next phase for Syria. This partnership, which has remained exceptionally stable, even according to many U.S. officials. I was there back in 2000, and well, I've been there many times, but the last time I did report from the region was at a U.S. base, out of a U.S. military base in northeast Syria. And the perception among American military officials is that they've never seen anything like this throughout their career with the military. The fact that they're dealing with a non-state actor that is so disciplined, that is so capable of carrying out missions according to U.S. military standards, and that have been very effective in fighting ISIS at the early stage, defeating the group militarily, depriving it from controlling any land, but also keeping it at bay. Like I said in the beginning, this is a very complicated region where everybody's vying for control. You've got the Turks and their Syrian allies on one side. You got the Iranians and the Russians, who at some point they've come together to decide that the Americans need to leave in order for us to take over this region that happens to be the safest and most stable region politically and also militarily, the areas that don't fall under the control of these aforementioned groups. It's a very complicated dynamic also for the United States, because on the one hand, you have a NATO ally that is insistent on fighting a local partner for the United States. And you have this local partner that has shown effectiveness in the fight against terrorism, which puts the United States in a very tough situation. Of course, you can't compare Washington's relationship with Ankara you can compare it to its partnership with the SDF being a non-state entity, but also we should also keep in mind that this is a partner that has proven to be reliable for the past 9 years and will probably continue to do, or more likely continue to do so in this chaotic environment in Syria. I would stop here and allow the audience to give any, to answer more or touch up on more issues in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the first question is from Stephen asking, did Trump betray the U.S.'s Kurdish allies despite the Kurds bearing the lion's share of efforts and casualties in the rejection of ISIS?
So this question has been asked a lot the past 3 to 4 years. How much the United States, how much of a role did the United States play in the most recent invasion of Turkey into northeast Syria? Well, we have to look at it. The invasion happened shortly, only a couple days after the Trump administration at the time, back in 2019, announced the partial withdrawal of U.S. troops. And it was a very small number, and I emphasize on that. And I'll get back to this point, why I keep insisting on keeping a small contingent of American troops on the ground is so important, so vital for the stability of the region, because what happens is a country like Turkey invades and creates a whole new different dynamic that is marred with the assassinations, displacement of local residents, and so on. And the region still suffers from those. The consequences that we have right now is that one simple policy or decision could change the trajectory of the war in that part of Syria. So whether we call it a betrayal or not, that particular decision did change the security dynamics, especially for the Kurds on the ground.
Thank you. Another question from Stephen. Is there a Kurdish provisional government in Turkey? And if so, what is its relationship with the U.S.? Will it declare national independence separate from Syria?
So the Kurds in Turkey, which is the largest concentration of Kurds in the entire Middle East, don't enjoy any political right to the same level as, I would say, to the Kurds in Iran. So that would be the second largest Kurdish concentration, and then Iraq, and then Turkey. As of now, only Kurds in Syria and Iraq have political status. Like the Iraqi Kurdish population does have an autonomy that is official. It is the Kurdistan region is part of the federal system that has been in place since 2003 after the U.S., after the liberation of Iraq. And so that's that. And now, as a result of the Syrian civil war, the Kurds were able to carve up this semi-autonomous region in parts of north and northeastern Syria. Kurds in Turkey, the most they've achieved over the past since the creation of modern republic in Turkey is taking over municipalities in Kurdish majority provinces in the southeast. But historically, and Kurds, and especially Kurds in Syria and Turkey, have had long-standing relationships, familiar relationships. I was born and raised in Syria. My family, half of my family resides on the Turkish side of the border. So these familial ties have, helped bring or keep the two communities together. But to answer Steve's question, the Kurds in Turkey have never had any type of autonomy or any sort of local governance system.
Thank you. Humama would like to ask about the different economies in the Kurdish regions and what currencies do they use? How exactly is the economy within those regions right now?
If we're only talking about the Kurdish regions of Syria, unfortunately, one of the problems that many Kurdish officials in the northeast complain about is lack of political independence from Damascus. It's true, the Syrian regime has a very minimal presence in the region. That's also, again, partially because of the U.S. military presence. But economically, you can't separate the two regions. The Kurds are in control. They run the show in the northeast. There is a minimal presence, like I said, of Syrian, along with Iranian and Russian troops. But the Kurdish region still dependent on Damascus. The currency is still the Syrian pound or lira. Much of the economy is still reliant on certain policies made in Damascus, although the economic situation in the Kurdish region relatively is much better than that in areas under the control of the Assad regime. Not only because of the stability that the Kurds have right now, but also because the great number of international NGOs and other groups that have helped pump into money and indirect investment into the local economy, which I insist is still not fully independent from Damascus.
Thanks. Robert Larrick asks if Turkey, et cetera, wants to return its Syrian refugees and the Assad administration has betrayed its UN international norms for responsibilities to protect, then why shouldn't we work with the Kurdish Syrian autonomous region as allies?
So it's a tricky one because, like I said, on the one hand, you have a NATO ally that is still important to carry out U.S. policy in the region. The United States still rely on Turkey for certain, issues in the Middle East, especially now that Erdogan is again hinting at, pivoting towards the West again, as opposed to his anti-Western policy in the past 10 years, I would say. But the Kurdish administration, the local administration in northeast Syria, has not made a decision yet, for different reasons, to fully rely on America. And that's also because America has not been able to provide that political support that Washington has already provided militarily. It's like interconnected. The two issues are very interconnected. On the one hand, you have the Turkish problem, Turkey's problem of accepting a Kurdish-led entity in North and East Syria. On the other, you have a local administration that is still not sure whether they will go back to the Syrian government or whether the region will have a different, situation where governance or the governing system, the current governance system that has been in place in the past 10 years or, since the beginning of the conflict in Syria, whether it will change or not. The situation is so fluid that even local officials don't know how and why the United States should help them the way local people, ordinary people would like to see. Because on the ground, you go to the Kurdish, towns and cities in northeast Syria, and me coming from America, they always ask the same question: why is the United States doesn't support the only ally, the only natural ally inside Syria? We have proven to be pro-American, to be pro-Western. We've established a governing system that adheres to Western ideals and Western values. But also we have to understand the broader context of why the United States doesn't give full recognition to this nascent entity.
Absolutely. So Larry White asks, Turkey maintains that all Kurdish groups are essentially PKK. How do you respond to this?
So that's a problem that Turkey has been having for the past, since basically the founding of the PKK in late 70s and early 80s, when they picked up arms officially, is that Turkey doesn't distinguish between Kurds. That the only Kurds, that really Turkey wants to work with are the Kurds, those Kurdish groups in the Kurdistan region of Iraq that have, provided Ankara with a big space to operate, to invest. Turkish companies. Turkey is the largest investor in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. So where there is no presence of PKK or affiliation with PKK, Turkey has no problem with investing and promoting under its own conditions as a major regional power. Other than that, anything that goes against what Turkey has been promoting in the region, or their form of AKP's form of political Islam, anything that goes against that is essentially PKK, because inside Turkey and outside Turkey, in Kurdish populated areas, it's so easy to label everyone as PKK, since Kurds don't enjoy any political status. So it's easy for Turkey to tell its allies in the West that these are the same PKK that we're fighting with at home. But that's PKK is only a small portion of Kurdish society, and it's a group that has been marginalized in many parts of Kurdistan, the greater Kurdistan. Those that fought with America for the past 9 years or so, the same groups that Turkey accuses of being PKK members are not. PKK, the United States would not work with a group that is labeled as a terrorist organization. The SDF is a completely distinct group. It's a completely separate group that has a plan for the people of northern Syria, and it's the only group inside country. It's the only entity actually inside country, to have been able to provide a vision for the future of Syria. None of other actors, whether it's the regime or other groups that have been part of the civil war, of the conflict, have been able to provide a concrete vision of what Syria should look like in the future. Everybody's have been fighting for power, essentially, and I would argue that the SDF and its Kurdish groups at large in northern Syria are the only group that really do have something to offer for good governance, for services, and for a brighter future, for whether it's for that part of Syria or for Syria as a whole.
Speaking of a brighter future there, how exactly is the long-running civil war evolving right now? Can you give us an update?
So you've got a bunch of intensity or low-key conflicts taking place throughout Syria, and I think I can talk about southern Syria and at this point because it's so important. Also, the fact that it's where the civil war emanated from. The whole anti-government movement started, or not the anti-government movement, but the protest movement back in 2011 started in southern Syria. The regime, although there's almost zero presence of rebel groups, some of them were either gave up their arms or moved to rebel-held areas as part of local agreements that Russia helped facilitate between the two sides, the regime and the rebels. But there's still that the fact that the regime hasn't been able, their definition of post-conflict, because they would like to say that the conflict is over and now we're working on the next phase. Their definition of post-conflict, whether it's an area that were at some point occupied by ISIS or areas that were held by the rebels, is completely different from what the Americans and the Kurds have in the east and the northwest. As long as there is no fighting the Russians and the Iranians and the Syrian regime are okay with a little bit of conflict. They actually benefit from that because they're being able to develop that and devise a new way to rely on economy. And you all know the Captagon trade, the drug trades that the Syrian regime and Hezbollah and other, militias affiliated with the Iranians and the Syrian government have been benefiting from in the past few years, largely because of this unstable situation in parts of the southern Syria and areas along the border with Lebanon. You've also got the northwest, where the essentially Al-Qaeda affiliated group is in charge, along with several Turkish-backed groups. They have their own, version of, governance that is completely different. It relies on, obviously, on, strict Islamic laws, and they portray as a very moderate form of political Islam, or they are familiar with. They insist that this is a religious movement that runs parts of northeast Syria, but it's different from everything else that we've seen in the context of global jihad, that this is a Syrian nationalist movement that also happens to be Islamist. And then, of course, you have the Kurdish region, which we've been talking about since the beginning of this webinar.
Thank you so much. In our last few minutes here, can you tell us what you think that the United States should do in regards to this region?
The United States should, first of all, keep those American troops on the ground, because I do believe that they make a difference, not only in the fight against ISIS, but also in terms of providing capacity building, security-wise, and also to help the civilian administration in northeast Syria develop its own tools to run the country, to run that part of the country on the long run. And the United States has been able to provide enormous support in terms of policing and civilian security, building civilian security forces outside of the structure of the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is good. And this is where the United States should invest. And long-term goals is to provide this region with all the tools it needs to be able to not be manipulated by Damascus, by the Russians, by the Iranians, and certainly not threatened by Turkey. So for me, it's for the United States to have a twofold policy that involves providing security support for the local forces, for the SDF and YPG against ISIS and other threats, and also provide a platform for the political Kurdish groups to come together, build a pluralistic society and governing system where everyone feels welcome. Let's not forget that this is a very diverse region. The Kurds might be making up the majority of the population, but we also have Arabs, we have Christians, we have Armenians, different groups that live side by side. So for the United States to be part of a project that can, build a sustainable, peaceful, plan, I think that should be the ultimate goal.
Thank you so much. And before we go, can you please tell our viewers where we can find some more of your work?
So I work with the Voice of America. I work with the Kurdish service, but I do also write in English. So if you go to Voice of America, voanews.com, and search for my name, Sirwan Kajjo, you should be able to find my writings. I'm also a writing fellow with the Middle East Forum. I recently joined the forum, so I will be writing for the forum. Whether it's about the Kurds or about the Syrian conflict as a whole.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We look forward to reading more of your work there. So we've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you again, Mr. Kajjo, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Stacey.
Of course. For our viewers, please be on the lookout for our weekly webinar offerings email coming out over the weekend. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks.